Alrighty, I think we can start admitting folks.
Thank you everyone for joining us. We will get started in just a minute. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Connect SoCal Sustainable Communities Program Call for Information session. So as everyone is joining the meeting, we'd like to encourage everyone to please type their name into the chat, as well as your organization if you have one, and where you're joining from today. This will also help us understand if the chat feature is functioning for all of our participants. And SCAG is also providing closed captioning for this session. If you would like to activate or hide this feature, please click the live transcript button at the bottom menu and choose show subtitle or hide subtitle. SCAG is also providing simultaneous translation services in Spanish and American Sign Language. All participants must select a channel by please clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, and please select either English or Spanish. And just to reiterate, all participants, please make sure to select a channel. And the ASL interpreter will be pinned and visible throughout the entire session. Okay, so now that we've gone through a few logistics, and anyone who has joined us in the meantime, we have pasted instructions into the chat. And please make sure to join either the English or the Spanish channel by please clicking the button on the bottom of your screen. So good morning, everyone. My name is Hannah Brunell. I am a senior planner with the Local Planning and Community Engagement Program at SCAG. And thank you so much for joining us for the second information session for the Connect SoCal Sustainable Communities Program Call for Applications for Civic Engagement, Equity, and Environmental Justice. And if you haven't already, we would please like to encourage you to type your name into the chat, your organization you're affiliated with, if you have one, and also where you're joining us from. This will help us understand who's in the room and also that this feature is working for you. Okay, and I will now pass it off to my co-facilitator, Alina Borja, to lead us through the next slides.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alina Borja. I'm going to go through some session logistics today. And just another reminder for everyone that is filtering into the room to introduce yourselves in the chat and also to choose an interpretation channel. Please choose either the English or Spanish interpretation channel so that our interpreters have access to everyone in the room. All right, so some logistics. This meeting is anticipated to take up to 1.5 hours. Please take care to mute your mic when you are not speaking. If you have a question at any point in the session, please feel free to type it into the chat box. We will also, though, have a designated Q&A as part of this presentation later on. And if you think of something later beyond this session, you can always reach out to our team member, Anita Au, directly. Her email is on the slide and will be sent out along with this presentation to everyone who registered to participate in today's meeting. Before we get into our session content, I would like to start with a short land acknowledgement. As staff at SCAG, I acknowledge that we are on the land of the Chumash, Tongva, and Kizh. As we acknowledge we are on the original lands of the Chumash, Tongva, and Kizh peoples, and how deeply the field of urban planning continues to engage with the land, we offer this acknowledgement as a first step to more conversations and actions that will support Indigenous communities and thriving. If you haven't already, I encourage you all to visit nativeland.ca to learn more about the traditional inhabitants of the land that you live on. This information session will start with the anticipated session outcomes, the call for applications presentation, which will cover the goals and objectives, applicant and project eligibility, the structure, process, and partnership opportunities, and proposed scoring criteria for this call. We will also be holding a Q&A session, and then we will wrap up. So now I'd like to go over the intended outcomes for this session. Participants will learn about the goals and structure of the Connect SoCal SCP call for. As SCAG staff, we hope to learn about potential projects and funding needs for organizations to do civic engagement, equity, and environmental justice work. We also want to learn about how technical assistance can be structured to better serve local jurisdictions and community-based organizations. If you have other outcomes for this meeting that you'd like to add to this list, please add them in the chat. All right, and we'd love to take the opportunity of all being convened in this room to get to know who is here and what types of projects you are interested in and what projects you might be interested in pursuing through this call for applications. Oh, David, can we leave that, that slide up just until I finish introducing the activity? Yeah, so we'd love to learn like the types of projects that you're interested in pursuing for this call. And what relationships or connections you might need to help you achieve those goals. So as we go through the presentation, you'll learn more about the structure of this opportunity. And I invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat, but also in the Jamboard, which is linked in the chat now. So on this Jamboard, you'll be prompted to add a sticky note with your name and organization, also the county that you are living or working in, the project type you might be interested in, and the kind of partnership that you might be looking for. And as you learn more about this call, like that, those points of information might all like become more clear for you later on. So feel free to just keep that Jamboard open for now and add to it later as you learn more about this call. We would love to help facilitate connections between you and other folks working on similar projects or in similar areas, or even folks who could be potential partners for this call for application. So please add to the Jamboard for that. And this information will be shared with others, and we will be using your name to look up your contact information based on your registration. So please only add to the Jamboard if you are comfortable with that kind of information being shared. All right, David, I am going to share my screen now. And I'm just going to go through a little demonstration of how to use the Jamboard for anyone who's not familiar. So you can click into it and add a sticky note by pressing this icon on the side. And that will bring up a sticky note for you. And you can type anything you'd like. Move this around, resize it as you need to. I've added some examples here of like what we're looking for. So the introductions should include name, organization, county, project type, and types of partnerships you might be looking for. So some examples would include an individual from a local CBO in Riverside County interested in a park space project, looking to connect with the Riverside County Public Works Department. Another example I've added down here in Spanish would be an individual working at a government agency in Ventura County, interested in arts infrastructure, looking to partner with a local CBO serving the Indigenous community. Yeah, so please, if you get the chance, introduce yourself on this Jamboard. All right, back to the slides, please. And I'll hand it back to Hannah.
Thank you, Alina. And so now we'd like to dive in to provide an overview of the SCP Call 4 and a little bit of context about the SCP program overall. So the SCP provides local agencies and partners with opportunities to access funding to meet the needs of their communities and also support regional goals while addressing recovery and resiliency strategies for COVID-19. So since 2005, we have provided resources through the SCP in direct technical assistance to local agencies via this program. And this particular call for applications is anticipated to be released in September of this year. And as we've mentioned, it will have a focus on civic engagement, equity, and environmental justice. So this slide provides an overview of the core goals of the SCP program. And so these goals include providing needed planning resources to local agencies, supporting multiple planning areas, including multimodal, housing, GHG reduction, and VMT reduction strategies. We want to ensure that our program promotes and addresses equity across the 6 counties in Southern California. And doing this by ensuring health and equity in regional land use and transportation planning, really with the ultimate goal to support closing the gap of racial injustice and better serving our communities of color. We also seek to encourage strategies that reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions, as well as implement key strategies outlined in Connect SoCal. And these include things that Connect SoCal calls key connections. So this includes housing supportive infrastructure, accelerated electrification, and other planning program areas. We also look to support regional resiliency by investing in local planning projects and ultimately increasing funding to our region and making our region more competitive for state and federal funding opportunities. So for this specific call for applications, we have 3 main objectives. Really the first, as I've mentioned, is to develop plans to close the racial equity gap. We also are looking for this call really to support a range of eligible land use and transportation activities that will ultimately prioritize efforts in communities of concern and SB 535 disadvantaged communities. And this call is being funded by the Regional Early Action Planning Grants of 2021, or REAP 2.0 for short. And so there are particular guidelines that this program must meet in order to comply with REAP 2.0. All projects being considered must meet 2 key requirements. So projects must address COVID-19 recovery and address a minimum of 1 of the following objectives that you see here on the slides. So that includes affirmatively furthering fair housing, accelerating infill housing, and reducing vehicle miles traveled. And so specific definitions and criteria of meeting these objectives can be found in the REAP 2.0 website, which we've shared a link in the chat. And we will also be providing additional resources to applicants as we get closer to releasing this call. And I will pass it off to Alina to cover the next couple of slides.
I think this one is yours, Hannah. I will do the one after that.
Oh, okay, no problem. Sure. So this slide really covers 3 key buckets of project categories that eligible projects fall within. And so as we've mentioned, a goal of this call for applications is to fund a wide range of eligible activities. And if you had attended some of our previous listening sessions last July, we had over 10 different project types. And so for this round of our call for applications, we have further refined these projects into these 3 key buckets to help streamline this process and also incorporate requirements from REAP 2.0. And so these 3 buckets you can see on the slide include land use and transportation strategies to increase accessibility, resiliency, and safety, housing supportive infrastructure plans and programs, and planning convenings and community engagement strategies. And so under the first bucket, we have a couple of example projects to give you a sense of the types of projects and programs that are eligible. So these include greenway connectivity plans, highways to boulevard plans. And within this second bucket, housing supportive infrastructure, you can see projects such as infrastructure and utility financing plans, in public art and infrastructure programs. And in this last bucket, planning convenings and community engagement strategies. Some examples include community advocacy and storytelling, as well as resiliency toolkits for local planning. I also want to mention that applicants can apply for multiple project categories. You can apply to one, or you can submit multiple applications across the 3 categories. And I will pass it off to Alina now. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. I'll go over applicant eligibility. So this call for applications includes a co-applicant structure. Eligible agencies can be applicants, and these agency applicants include but are not limited to local or regional agencies, transit agencies or districts, county transportation agencies, natural resources or public land agencies, county public health agencies, housing authorities, special districts, school districts, and tribal governments. Eligible co-applicants include community-based organizations, nonprofits, regional housing trust funds, academic institutions, and social enterprises that fulfill a social or public service mission. It also includes organizations that utilize a fiscal sponsor. And multiple co-applicants can apply alongside an agency. So the structure for this application, for this call for applications, allows agency applicants to apply via a partnership with up to 2 co-applicants. Under an agency and co-applicant partnership, co-applicants would be compensated to lead key elements of the project. In addition to that, a consultant team would be procured to perform identified work on behalf of the agency and the co-applicant partnership. SCAG is aligned with REAP 2.0 and prioritizes funding in areas that have been traditionally disadvantaged, underserved, underrepresented, and under-resourced. The REAP 2.0 guidelines have clearly defined areas that are in most need of support and recovery efforts to address the impacts of COVID-19. These include areas of high segregation and poverty, disadvantaged and historically underserved communities, impacted households and disproportionately impacted households, and low-income households. And this slide shows the proposed application and evaluation process. We're currently in this first box, the pink one, where SCAG is developing the program guidelines with our regional partners to shape eligible projects and ensure alignment with community needs. Once the guidelines are released, applicants will be encouraged to submit proposals. To facilitate application development, SCAG staff will be available via office hours and hold webinars to assist with proposal development. Finally, proposals will be evaluated on a set of predetermined criteria, co-developed with SCAG staff and our other regional partners. There are currently 4 areas of proposed scoring criteria, including project need and benefit to priority populations, project design and outcomes, local partnerships, and inclusive and equitable engagement. We also want to clarify that while one application is recommended, applicants may submit multiple applications. And back to Hannah for Q&A.
Thank you, Alina. Okay, so we have now concluded the presentation portion of this information session. So we're happy to open it up for Q&A. So we've also been logging questions in the chat so we can answer them in order that they were received. And if you'd like to verbally ask a question, please raise your hand and please indicate that you'd like to speak. And after we've answered all the questions in the chat, we'll open it up to the room to ask further and follow-up questions.
Great, thanks, Hannah. It looks like we have one question in the chat so far, and that's from Noelle Berger. Are higher education districts applicable entities? And I think that could be answered on slide 13.
David, are we able to bring back the slides, please?
Yeah, so academic institutions are under the co-applicant eligible applicants, and that would include higher education institutions. So I hope that answers your question, Noelle, but feel free to clarify. And then I see a hand from Elsa.
Hi, yes, good morning, and thank you for the presentation. I'm sorry if I missed this early in the presentation, but is there a total, basically, pot of funding? Like, do we know how much the total pot of funding is, and also what is the grant size range, I guess, expected?
Sure. So I can help with that question. So at this time, we're anticipating approximately 5 million for this call for applications. However, that has not been confirmed yet. So that's what we're anticipating as a total pot of funding available. And to your second question, the range of funding per project, that would really depend on the type of project that you're applying for. We've anticipated, projects at, a $250,000 amount, and kind of scaled from there, depending on, the type of project you're applying for and your proposed scope for the project. And if Julia is on the line, if you'd like to add anything, please feel free.
No, I think you covered it, Hannah.
Great. We have a few more questions that have popped in the chat. First from Leslie Ortega, what are the limitations on what funding can be used for?
Leslie, I'm wondering if you might be able to further describe your question. Do you have any specifics that you're looking at? And so I think, you know, we can answer this generally. So because this call for applications is funded by the REAP 2.0, the Regional Early Action Planning Grants, there, you know, we have to adhere to those larger program guidelines. And so if we can bring back the slides, if we can go back to the project objectives. Okay.
I think that's slide 10. Great.
Okay. So this slide really shows the key objectives that projects must meet in order to you know, comply with the REAP 2.0 guidelines. So as we mentioned, all projects must address COVID-19 recovery and resiliency, and at a minimum, hit at least one of the three other objectives that you see on these slides. So in terms of limitations, you know, projects that are kind of outside of these objectives, we would likely not be able to fund those projects. And please let me know if that answers your question, or I'm happy to provide any further detail.
Miguel Lujano has a question. The City of Riverside has recently approved a development project for a 64-unit apartment complex, and the developer is currently bringing the project back to City Council in October for final approval. Would the city be able to apply for funds to help increase the affordable component from 15% to at least 30% with funds? It's a great question. And very specific. So Hannah, do you want to take that on, or maybe Julia?
It would be great to talk with you further about this project, Miguel. Yes, it's a really specific type of project that you have. Yeah, so I think it would be great to kind of talk to you offline, maybe one-on-one, to kind of hear more about, you know, what you're looking for in sort of your goals with the project.
Great. Returning to the questions about higher education districts, we had a clarification that LACCD is a higher education school district. So they're wondering if the institution would be considered its own agency or a co-applicant. And I know that we had the academic institutions in the co-applicant structure, but it's I guess it's also a district. So Hannah or Julia, do you have further guidance on that?
Julia might, oh, go ahead, yeah.
This is Julia. You know, some of these questions that we can't answer in this moment, we'd be happy to collect a confirmed response, and we'll be compiling an FAQ based on all of the questions arising during this session and the questions that arose during the last info session, and making that available. So we're happy to sort of follow up on any of these that we don't have a confirmed response at this time.
Great, thanks, Julia. And I'll jump from the chat and go to raised hands for a second. So Layla, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to voice a question?
Sure. Hi, everybody, and hi, Hannah. I'm Layla with the City of NGO. I have a question, which is the grant fund, will it be used for an actual project? Let's say we have a public arts / infrastructure project. It could be a bridge with some art element. Is that money will be used for construction of the project, or if it is something that it will be used for planning such a project? And that was the question.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Layla, and it's great to hear from you. So, through this program, at this time, we're not funding construction projects or infrastructure projects. We would be able to fund sort of temporary and pilot projects. And really the goal here is more focused on planning and pilot projects.
Great, thank you.
Great. We'll go back to the chat, and there's a question from Yasmin Doroteo. Which regions can apply to the grants? And this is for all SCAG regions. So the 6 counties within the SCAG region, which includes Imperial, Los Angeles, Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura. And then Elizabeth Dixon asks, can funds be used to support housing trust funds? And yes, I believe housing trust funds are within the co-applicant category. So you can apply as a co-applicant. Are there any further clarifications on that, Hannah or Julia?
Yeah, they are eligible, and I'll just say that it's stated in the REAP 2.0 guidelines as an eligible use of the funds.
Hi, Elizabeth Dixon here. And I just wanted to elaborate a little bit. Maybe I just need a little bit more clarity on the co-applicant component, but I'm a consultant working with San Bernardino Council of Governments, and they're working to establish a regional housing trust fund. So in the event that the trust fund isn't in effect yet, they're going to need seed funding to really get this thing off the ground. And I wanted to get a better understanding if that would be an eligible activity.
This is Julia. We're understanding that it's an eligible activity, but I actually would probably point you to our REAP 2.0 housing director, who could give a little bit more info and background on that question. And we can also include that in our FAQ.
Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe just to add a little bit to that, you were asking about the co-applicant structure. So I'm just navigating to that slide. And just to clarify, we through this call, we're really hoping to facilitate partnerships between local agencies and local community-based organizations. So the goal there would be for the local CBO to work on key aspects of the project, whether that's engagement, existing conditions, developing data analysis, and they would be supported, alongside the local agency, and we would likely hire a consultant team to support that process as well.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that answer, Hannah. Going back to Leslie's question about the limitations on what the funding can be used for, there's a clarification that she's thinking in regards to working with the city to fund maintenance of better sidewalks in their area. And then there's also a second clarification on whether CBOs would be co-located partners. If we could return to that slide of the presentation. So I think slide 13. Yes, CBOs could be co-applicants. And then to your question on whether the funds could be used for maintenance, sidewalk maintenance, I'll turn to Hannah and Julia.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we wouldn't be able to fund actual construction and that type of maintenance. But if you were looking to do a larger planning effort in your city or in a particular area, that is something that could be eligible.
And yeah, Leslie, feel free to keep the questions coming if you need further clarification. And then Jessica Ramos has a question. So to be eligible for funding, any project proposed by an agency must include a co-applicant. And are the REAP 2.0 guidelines viewable at this time? We can definitely drop the REAP 2.0 guidelines in the chat. And the co-applicant structure, I believe, is an optional but recommended structure. Yeah, that there could be up to 2 co-applicants. But feel free to clarify on that answer. I'm also looking.
No, I think you got it. Yeah.
And I'll drop the. These are also draft guidelines still, correct?
Yes. So these are currently the draft guidelines. The final guidelines have not yet come out. Julia, do you have updated timeline on that?
Sure. And just to clarify, we have been building this program, SCP call for guidelines based on the released draft guidelines, the released REAP 2.0 draft guidelines. And we're hoping that those, the final guidelines, the final REAP guidelines are available by the end of this month. Perhaps sooner, perhaps later, but that's sort of what we're assuming. And so our program guidelines, SCP call for, the draft is really sort of contingent on the release of the final REAP 2.0 guidelines.
Great, I see Layla's hand is up. I don't know if you have another question, Layla, or if
No,
that's
it's
just
from the last time. So
Okay.
sorry.
Thanks so much. And that's all we have for questions in the chat. Unless anyone has any further questions, would like to raise their hand and voice those. Yeah, that's all we have for this moment.
Great. Yeah, please feel free, anyone to jump in with a question if one arises. For now, I think we can move on from the Q&A session onto the next slides. Thank you for all of those thoughtful questions, everyone. Oh, and just as a reminder, we will be collecting like the notes from this Q&A session and the presentation slides and all the like the recording for this session as well. We'll be collecting all of those materials and posting them on our website and sending them to all of the registered attendees in about, you can expect that in about 2 weeks. We just need some time to collect those, get them posted and like translate some items. So all of that will be sent to you and posted online. So now that we've gone through those questions, is the Jamboard still up? Yes, it is still up. Who is it? Ryan, I think, would you mind posting that in the chat? Or Annalie, would you mind posting that in the chat again? Yes, so this is a reminder to please add to the Jamboard now that we've gone through the structure of this call for applications. Please add your information and your ideas, and thank you to everyone who has already added them in. So this Jamboard will remain open for the next couple of weeks, and the information in it will be sent to you in that recap email that I mentioned in a couple of weeks.
Certainly, I've spoken with all my life, but I find it hard to understand Alex Fergus sometimes.
Hi everyone, would you please mind muting yourselves if you are not speaking? Thank you. All right, back to Hannah.
Great. Thanks, Alina. So we'd like to wrap up this session, providing you a high-level timeline so you can see where we expect to go with this call for applications. And so this spring, we relaunched our call really to align with the REAP 2.0 guidelines. And we anticipate releasing the draft guidelines in August, followed by our regional council approving our program guidelines in September. And then we will be opening the call after our regional council approves the program guidelines. So we anticipate an evaluation process to take place late fall and winter 2023. And the project recommendations, we anticipate announcing those in spring 2023. And just a few next steps, and I know Alina had already mentioned some on the follow-up resources we will provide after this meeting. And based on the questions and the feedback that we received during this session, we will continue to develop our call for applications guidelines. And with all of you who registered for this session, we will be sharing our guidelines and posting those on our website. And we will be doing a very robust outreach strategy to promote this call for applications once it's open in September. And we also, look forward to working with you all, and we'll be available for one-to-one coaching throughout that application process. And also, if you have not, please sign up at the link that Annalie provided in the chat. So this will allow you to get updates on the call for application process. And thank you so much for participating today. We really appreciate everyone joining us today. And just to reiterate, as we mentioned, we'll be providing the presentations and a summary within a Q&A document, and this will be emailed to all the folks who registered. And if you have any questions that come up in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Anita Au. Our contacts are listed here in the slide, and we can drop those in the chat. And it'll also be provided again in the post-session email. And thank you so much again. And we really appreciate everyone's time today.
I'm just going to interrupt you here. Sorry. We actually have one more question in the chat if we have
sure.
the time to answer it. So from Greg, for infrastructure funding projects, is the intent to provide infrastructure to undeveloped areas or to enhance existing infrastructure to support higher density development in developed areas? Which I think we sort of discussed how this is, a planning approach or meant to fund planning projects and not so much infrastructure projects, but I know that one of the eligibility criteria is to accelerate infill housing. So maybe that's more towards the latter, which is to support higher density development in developed areas. But Julia or Hannah, if you have additional information that could provide some context to that question.
Yes, sure. Yeah, so thank you for this question. It's a great question. So really aligning with the REAP 2.0 objectives, it would really be focused on accelerating sort of infill development. And I think, kind of exactly what you said, kind of supporting higher density in sort of developed areas would be more closely aligned with the goals of REAP 2.0 for this call for projects.
Yeah,
Greg, I see you unmuted. Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Yes, thank you. This is Greg. I was just saying, yeah, that does answer my question. I appreciate it. I was just trying to get a better understanding on which type of projects we should be looking for with our clients. So.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And then we also have another one more question from Allison. Can you please share the slide with the timeline again, so we can go to the last slide. I think it's 20. Oh. I think there's a lag when you control the slides, but thank you so much.
And just as a note, we'll send out the slide deck to participants and have the information posted on the SCP website, so it's accessible beyond the session today.
Yeah, and if you need it now, feel free to screenshot as well.
I'm glad we got these questions in. Are there any other questions that folks have?
I don't see any of the chat.
I'm sorry, this is Kanika. I have a question, but I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. I will get to my chat button. Quick question for you. You mentioned you're gonna release the guideline. Did you guys talk about like how much funding you guys are looking to provide for each agency?
Yeah, Kanika, thanks for that question. I think we kind of we did answer that earlier, but for each agency depends on the type of project, and really how like the number of applicants we have as well. So there's no prescribed amount in our guidelines for that, but we expect that we will have approximately 5 million for the entire grant, if that's helpful.
So you guys don't have like a range or amount that we can have a better understanding for what we can apply for?
Sorry, your mic is really faint. Did you ask if we have a regional amount?
You have like an estimate range though, like so you get 5 million, and based on the number of jurisdictions you have in SCAG, were you guys able to figure out like a range that you guys are able to provide if everyone were to apply? I guess.
Right. So I'm really sorry that I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I just did the math.
Sorry. Could you repeat your question one more time? I'm really sorry. I can't hear you quite so well.
So the question was, you said you didn't have a price, like a funding amount that yet, but do you have like an estimate range on what you anticipate something like this would be? Because I know your other SCP grant, they usually range around like the 200,000. Would this be something similar?
Right. Okay. So an estimated range similar to previous SCP grants, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, we currently do not have that, but can definitely take your comment into account when we're developing the guidelines and attempt to provide something like that. Hannah and Julia, I don't know if you have further thoughts on an estimate for projects or an estimated range for projects. Oh, Hannah or Julia.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely depends on the type of project you're applying for. When we were initially envisioning this, you know, we were thinking around that kind of 200 to 250K range. Although, you know, I think, you know, I think we want to include kind of some sort of guidance to folks as we're sort of, you know, working on our program guidelines. So I think this is definitely something we can follow up with and include in our Q&A document. Because it sounds like that would be helpful guidance to folks.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. That would help us because when we're applying for the grant, we want to know, get an idea of like how much are we getting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is Elsa from Long Beach Forward. I had asked the original question, and I agree. It's an important. It's sort of like the chicken or the egg, in terms of developing proposals. So how much you anticipate being funded will also influence how large of a scale of proposal you're writing. And so yeah, so a funding range is helpful.
Great. Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. And that's something that we can work on and share out with folks.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Staff will stick around for a little bit to see if there are any lingering questions. But I think that concludes our presentation. And yeah, you can expect follow-up materials in about 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all the questions.